Okay, Tov. So over the last couple of days, we've explained the concept that Hachamim say Mishenichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha and how to understand it in two different ways, the Rambam and the Meiri. Now, that same Gemara which says this statement continues and says, Rav Papa says that because the month of Adar is a special month of joy and happiness, therefore the Mazal, the fortune and the fate of Israel is a better one during this month. And thus, if a person has a court case and is able to schedule it during month of Adar, is a court case with a non-Jew, one should schedule it during the month of Adar because one's Mazal is a better Mazal during this month. That's what the Gemara says. Now, the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch do not quote this. But the question which the Rishonim discuss, and many try to understand this, is that the Gemara elsewhere tells us, En Mazal Israel. There is actually a discussion about this, but the accepted approach seems to be En Mazal Israel, that Israel do not have a concept of Mazal, of fortune and of fate. The concept of Mazal really is the idea that a person is affected by astrology and by the fate of the star or the constellation or the planet a person is under, but that doesn't apply in the month of Adar, we're being told. But the problem is, the Hachamim say elsewhere that there is no concept of Mazal Israel. We are above this. We are not under the influence of stars and planets and constellations. So how do we understand this? So we find different answers. The Ritva says, yes, true, normally in Mazal Israel, says the Ritva. This is from 700 years ago. But during the month of Adar and the month of Av, there is Mazal. And therefore in Adar there's good Mazal, in Av there is less good Mazal, and therefore one should be cautious of the month of Av and less cautious in the month of Adar. That's the Ritva's approach. The Hatam Sofer, Moshe Sofer, 250 years ago, he says, look, he says, true, there's no Mazal for Israel, but there is Mazal for Goyim. And therefore, you should schedule it with a non-Jew because his Mazal isn't a good Mazal during the month of Adar, because we have a better Mazal, and the effect of that is that the non-Jewish people have a less of a Mazal. Okay, different approaches how to understand this. But what I want to really say here is what the Rambam's approach. And the Rambam, in a famous letter he wrote, he says this in various places in his Mishneh Torah, but he forcefully puts this very clearly in his letter. He wrote a letter around 1195 or so to Hachamim in the south of France, in Montpellier, who asked him about the whole concept of Mazal and astrology. And he writes a great length to explain how the whole concept of Mazal is one which a person needs to stay away from. It's not something which we as Jewish people believe in. We don't have that concept. We are directly related to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the whole science of astrology, the Rambam says, is a pseudoscience. It's not something which is scientifically correct, and one should stay away from it. And therefore, for the Rambam, the whole concept of Mazal is not something which we engage with. There are places in the Talmud where there are references to the concept of Mazal, and the Rambam says those have to be understood allegorically, have to be understood in a different fashion, but one cannot take it as at face value that there is a concept of Mazal. There is no concept of Mazal, especially not for Israel. And therefore, according to Rambam, this whole concept doesn't apply during the month of Adar. To add to this is that even if one wants to accept the concept of Mazal, the concept of Mazal only applies to someone who puts themselves under the fate of Mazal. If one wants to live with that kind of relationship, to be affected by the randomness of the planets and constellations and stars one's born under, then fine. Then HaKadosh Baruch Hu will say to him, that's the way we want to live, so I'll leave you to that. And then perhaps the month of Adar can be a good Mazal, good fortune, and the month of Av can be a bad fortune. But when one cuts out the intermediaries and goes directly to the source, directly to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there is no need to worry about Mazal, because one is directly in the relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and so therefore there's nothing to worry about Mazal. And thus, when we take this all together, really, one focus during the month of Adar shouldn't be about the Mazal and about the fortune and about what can happen during this month. at least on the Rambam's reading and on other readings as well. Our focus should be, as we discussed yesterday, directly with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and not to take these things seriously to the extent that we change our conduct. Either Gemara says this, yes, the Gemara says this, it has to be understood in a different way. So to summarize, the concept that during the month of Adar there is a special Mazal, some of the Rishonim take this literally, the Ritva, and this is an exception. But generally speaking, the consensus is that this is not lahalacha, it's not accepted, and there isn't a concept of Mazal at all, or certainly not for Israel. And this month, one doesn't need to worry, or the month of Adar for that matter, one doesn't need to worry about these concepts. There is I'll say quickly, there is another concept of siman. Siman is something which we accept, which is why Sfaradim generally wish each other besiman tov, not mazal tov. Siman is different to mazal. Siman is something which is acceptable. Siman means it's a good sign, it's a good auspicious thing, but it's very different to mazal. And that could be the concept of Adar, but one shouldn't live their lives under the concept of mazal and fortune and luck. That's not the Jewish approach. We go directly to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and cut out all the intermediaries.